So what can I answer for you? I'm sure you have a lot of questions, and I might have the right answer.
Okay. How are you detecting that the content is the same? So I presume it's some kind of checksum? Or,
Yep, cryptographic hashes.
Yep, using what? So
SHA-1.
SHA-1, okay.
And the total amount of memory dedicated to the cache is one deduplication realm?
Yes, exactly. Per cluster, I should note. So a lot of the design decisions are based on sort of signals that you send to us. So you decided to make a separate cluster for a reason, right?
Right.
You decided to make a separate data center and all that. So our distributed engine will not cross the boundaries of a single cluster because we just can't know that you didn't intend for the cluster named DMZ to never interact with the cluster named production, right? So we just sort of take that signal in and act accordingly.
Okay. In a later version, I'd like to subdivide that further. That, I may have tighter constraints on workloads or data similarity.
Yeah, that's a great option. So let's not talk about futures, actually. Never mind.
Given the fact you're at version 0.7, talking about version 2 might be a bit premature.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Okay. Talk a little bit about so it's a write-through cache, right?
Yes.
And talk a little bit about the intercept process.
Yeah, sure. So I can actually just draw it out. Whiteboard time.
Yeah, I've been trying to get the
Hooray!
Oh, I chose the right color, too. All markers are that color, regardless of what it looks like. So you've got your ESX host, right? And it's normal configuration. I'm going to draw the boxes bigger. You've got a really big ESX host.
Much bigger than version 1.
So this is your VM kernel interface.
And somebody on the Twitter is complaining that your gears don't completely mesh, but
Man.
If they did, they wouldn't turn anyway, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, they do seem pretty locked in. So your VM kernel interface, and you probably have more than one, right? So let's just do that. VMK2. And then you've got a data store. Let's call it DS1. We look at the data store, get the host name or the IP address. We compare it to a routing table, which is built up of all of the VM kernel interfaces in your environment to identify the VM kernel interface that services the traffic for that data store. Once we identify it, we create a port group. That port group is a private port group. We search your environment to see what VLAN IDs you don't use. And let's say we find 4090, right?
Bob uses that one, but that's okay.
What's that?
No.
Oh, yeah, right.
Ignore just the generally snide comments.
So that's our private port group, and then we make a public port group.
Are those configurable if
Yes.
you make a bad decision?
Yep, yeah.
Not that you guys would make a bad
And
decision.
actually, we're going to go one step further, and we don't do this today, but they're actually working, literally, they're working on it right now. They're watching.
Stop watching and get back to work.
Yes.
So what we'll do is we'll choose this VLAN ID for our private communication. And we're just saying that it's not used in your infrastructure.
Yeah.
But how do I know that your network isn't using it?
Well, that's the
Right.
thing, you know. Like,
So we're going to listen. We're going to just listen to see if we see the broadcasts coming across. If we do, we'll choose another one. Or if you want, just override it and put a VLAN ID that
a
you
suggestion is nice, but
Yeah.
the option to override is
Definitely.
also nice.
Got to be there. Now we make a public port group, and this public port group has the exact same VLAN ID as the VMK that we identified as servicing the data store. So let's say that's 2, right? So we create another one right there, 2. When we put our accelerator there, what we do is we assign this interface to the private port group. We assign this interface, which goes out to storage, to the public port group. And here's the key. It's a nice atomic operation. We change this VLAN ID to 4090. These interfaces have already been set up knowing what they're supposed to be intercepting, what they're supposed to be accelerating. That VLAN ID flips, and bam, it goes through Infinio. It's MAC-based spoofing. It's address-based spoofing. So when the ESX host makes its outbound connection, it's going to then ask, who's my storage system? Infinio says, right here. Connects through us. We stitch ourselves into the NFS connection, and we're off to the races. That, in a nutshell, is how it works.
So the amount of cache area is memory on your ESX host.
Yeah, exactly.
So memory is getting cheaper and cheaper constantly. So you would have same defaults, I would imagine, and you can tune that up for the amount of cache area that you can have.
Right now, we haven't really sort of investigated the space of what the maximum is. Yeah. But what we're saying is that it would be 1/16 of system memory as the default. But we would more or less round it to either 4 gigs, 8 gigs, or 16 gigs. Once you get below 4 gigs, it's not really all that interesting. Above 16 gigs, we could do that, yeah. Yeah, certainly you could have a 32 gig or even maybe somewhere in between.
Okay.
And the peer-to-peer communication will occur over a storage network or vMotion network, really whatever you want. It's primarily over the storage network, and it can spill over into other networks. But again, that's actually another interesting point here. The peer-to-peer communication, we make sure that we only use VLANs that have been tagged for vMotion or storage or something like that. And the reason is because we need to guarantee that our peer-to-peer communication does not go over a network that you didn't deem appropriate for that type of sensitive content. You built your architecture a certain way for a certain reason. And certainly using VLANs for guest VM networks would just be crazy out of bounds from a security perspective to pass what is effectively storage content over those networks. So we look at your infrastructure and we say, I see. So you've got all these VMKs. This one is for vMotion. Well, vMotion transfers memory state of your VMs over the wire. Presumably, that means it's appropriate for sending storage content. Or you've got a storage VMK. We can just pass peer-to-peer content over the storage network itself. Certainly adequate from a security perspective.
That's a good choice. Because that was going to be one of my next questions, was some of the deployments that I've done a few years ago. What did have very tight security boundaries between different kinds of VM and different kinds of storage. So that was using NetApp's vFilers to separate storage domains but virtualize the storage. People will be doing that for specific reasons. So it sounds like this will actually still work in those infrastructures because of those choices.
Yes. Yeah, and okay. It also plays into our peer-to-peer strategy of not requiring the assignment of addresses. So when we were going through the requirements for this product, I was really making a point that IP address management is a real challenge. And if you go to an installer and it says, hey, give me 12 IP addresses, that is a non-starter.
Yeah, or insist on DHCP or something like
that. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So really, we've tried our best to make a product for us, IT administrators, from start to finish. We want to make sure that we're out of the way. It's nice and simple to use. You don't need to do anything but click a download button, swipe a credit card, you get a 30-day free trial. We even try to fit it into your budgeting cycle. So there's a 30-day free trial, but budgeting cycles aren't 30 days. They're longer. So you can renew the free trial so that you can push the cost into another quarter. These are real challenges of IT operations, and across the board from start to finish, we've tried to think about our buyer, what do they actually face? What are their real challenges? And purchasing, procurement, all of this stuff, these are real problems that need to be addressed, and that's what we're doing.
What is the update, upgrade policy, and ongoing support?
So support, there's two sides to this. I should go back to
One of those slides I made him skip.
Yeah.
Push the
right
train.
there.
The thing I
Phone
can-
number, it's nice and blurry. In the product, it'll be blurry too.
Well, dark gray on black is always a good choice.
That'll save me on glasses.
So a phone number, email address for support, and eventually we'll have chat. 3 years of support included in the purchase price. Standard support.
Carrier, right?
What's that?
Free carrier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Problem solved.
So obviously you're putting additional load on your host. How does that scale with high CPU workloads? I mean, what kind of overhead are we saying?
So I would expect at the high end, you certainly wouldn't consume more than 2 vCPUs of capacity. I would expect it's normally around 1 CPU. It might crest just based on workload. So if you have a very transient workload, those spikes would certainly consume more CPU.
Yeah. Although you're also creating a lot of context switch overhead. Because every storage request requires a context switch from the compute VM to your VM.
There are certainly overheads involved in doing any sort of server-side caching.
Yeah. But is that faster than waiting for your disk?
It's just,
Yeah.
it's probably the right trade-off.
That's why you have a trial, right?
What's that? I'm
That's
sorry.
why you have a trial, so you can look at it
Yeah,
and see
exactly.
if it fits your
Yeah,
workload.
exactly.
Yeah, but there are certain disadvantages to doing this sort of thing in a VM, and that's one of them.
Right, as opposed to making it all a kernel module, but to
Exactly.
say, and I want a
yeah.
kernel module and give me 16 gig. The VMware architecture isn't designed for that. So
Yeah, and from my prerogative, building the product was really about the buyer's need. And there are certain cases, certain extreme cases where you have workloads that truly saturate a 64-core system. But first and foremost, I wanted to build a product for your IT administrator. No reboots. If you do a kernel module, you're going to reboot every single ESX host.
yeah.
With us, you saw it with your own eyes. You slip it in, and it doesn't interrupt storage. Nothing goes offline, nothing like that. So it's as easy to install as it is to remove. It's all about IT operations efficiency.
Well, that also improves your chances of somebody actually trialing it.
Oh
as
yeah,
well,
yeah. You don't have to have any hardware. There's no procurement.
Much
nothing.
I don't
smaller.
do some trials because they're a giant pain,
Right.
And for the 30 days that I'm going to get out of it, by the time I get it all installed and find a ton of IP addresses and all that stuff, I'm going to have 10 days left in that trial, and I don't even bother,
Yep,
So this
exactly.
Yeah, well, you'll be able to drop this trial into a real system more easily as well. If you don't have to reboot production, you can, because again, you can turn it off. You can just delete the VMs and so on. There's there's complexity in that it's doing a lot of config changes in the back end that it hides from
but
you.
the chances
In
you'll
our
see your
environment-
real workloads with it are a lot higher when it's set up like this.
Yeah.
So,
So let me ask that. You talk about, it's easy to remove from your workflow or from the flow of your data. Obviously, this is a pre-V1 product right now. So what sort of failure mechanisms are there in there in case you do have a failure of caching or failure of whatever that shim that you put in there is? Can it take itself out of that flow so it actually hits storage directly?
Yes, absolutely. So two points here. When you accelerate a data store, you might have more than one data store going through a single accelerator. So you disable acceleration on a single data store, but the accelerator is still needed. It stays there, but the decelerated data store just does not get the cache benefit, right? When the last data store is removed from caching, the accelerator removes itself. Now that exact same mechanism is part of the HA strategy. The fact that we can insert ourselves and remove ourselves without interruption means that detecting the fact that a data store is offline and we can't identify the reason, it means zap, unplumb that accelerator. If a data store goes offline and we can't attribute it to anything out of our control, you could imagine a data store goes offline, you call the accelerator and you say, are you healthy? Can you see back-end storage? Are operations, heartbeat operations passing through? If it says yes, it's likely a back-end storage system or some other external factor. But if you can't contact the accelerator or you can't, it tells you I'm not healthy, the console just zaps it, unplumbs it, and content continues on.
So you're a layer 3 shim, correct? Basically.
At the layer 2, layer 3 boundary.
Okay, so you still have to wait for ARC timeouts then, or
no. So that's the whole idea about the VLAN switch. The VLAN switch is kind of a very interesting operation. It forces the refresh upon changing a VLAN ID.
Okay.
So I guess from day-to-day operations, I mean, obviously this doesn't impact the motion and all the other things. How do you handle like maintenance mode? I mean, so if you're manually taking down a host, do you have to disable the accelerator on the host, shut it down?
We get callbacks from vCenter, and when we see a host going into maintenance mode, we're going to put ourselves into bypass.
Okay.
A lot of this stuff, it really just does come down to intuition based on the signals we're getting from the administrator. You put a host into maintenance mode, well, that should be telling us something, right? It means that you want to do something there. So we should get out of the way. The VM kernel interfaces, using that for the peer-to-peer traffic, it's the same thing. You gave us a signal, we're gonna follow that.
So this is like your setup process. You mentioned you have an option to put it on another data store. Does your setup process take into account possible DRS to make sure that your appliance doesn't move over if it's on a shared data store?
That's a great point, and our initial deployment isn't really intended for non-local. The option is there, and in fact, one of our alpha customers is using it in that manner. But we hadn't thought down that path just because we don't really intend for it to be deployed that way in version 1.
Well, a number of people are doing, like I've got a bunch of ESXi hosts that have no local storage, for example, you know, and so that wouldn't be an option for me. You know?
Yeah.
None
One of our alpha sites is using auto deploy,
Okay.
so they don't have any local disk,
Yeah,
and
whether
they're
it's
doing the
auto
exact same
deploy
thing.
or
Yeah.
USB sticks
Yeah,
or
sure.
whatever Dell ships internally on
Yeah.
their, you know, that sort of thing, you know.
Yeah, none of my hosts have local storage.
Yeah.
Because they're all set up dual boot to Windows so that I can reconfigure the lab. So it's boot from the USB stick for VMware.
Maybe it was mentioned and I missed it. How are you doing the licensing? Is it per socket, per
Yeah,
host?
it's per socket.
Cool.
The thinking behind that is to align it with VMware,
Yeah,
so that
thank
when
you.
you think about procurement, you say, I'm buying a server, it's 2 sockets, I need 2 VMware licenses and 2 Infinio
Yeah,
licenses.
that's a good
And it's a
choice.
pooling model as well. So if you bring a host offline, the licenses are not pegged to the host. It's a shared pool across the entire cluster,
Yeah.
making it really easy to reassign.
Yeah. The really strange thing is, you know, if you have a host that's that's, you know, got slow storage performance and is short on memory, you can add another host with a bunch of memory, cache across the network.
Oh, yeah, true.
Yeah.
It's a perverse thought.
Yeah,
but
I think it'll be
everyone-
interesting to see how customers like that line of reasoning. It's like they're going to use the software in these sorts of ways and
Yeah.
be interested.
So aside from the dashboard, what sort of monitoring, alerting, external exposure do you have?
So it's really about the dashboard, and we will likely expose SNMP from the console, which is actually a really important point, because from an administrator's perspective, we're a distributed cache, right? Would you rather go to each individual node or get the summarized information from the console? You can potentially ping the address of the Infinio appliance, right? Something like that. But really, I think the most valuable use of it would be getting SNMP out of the management console.
That makes sense. As long as you get the information fed in from the individual servers. So for example, if I have 4 nodes that are being cached, and I lose 2 of them, there might be something wrong that I might need to come back to you guys about. But if, I don't normally care if one has an issue, as long as the entire cache is working, or at least recovering.
And that view up here in the top right corner, the status, that's where you would primarily see where there are problems. It would turn red. It'll give you a list of the problems, and it'll actually give you automated remediation. So the automated remediation, it typically is one of 3 things. Go to bypass mode, which is really just pass traffic through Infinio. Don't unplumb it, but pass traffic through Infinio, but don't accelerate. There's unplumb, which is really just remove the plumbing from the system so that traffic passes directly to storage without Infinio. And then there's redeploy, which is really just unplumb and redeploy. And that should cover most of the edge cases, but of course there are circumstances that will require further information.
Yeah, and I definitely know that there are a lot of people out there who don't need another tab in the browser.
Yeah, it's staring at another screen. Yeah, that's definitely true.
I'm not going to use the S word, but...
Isn't that why you have 6 monitors?
No, that's so I can have Chrome running.
Wait. You work for the mouse.
Well, one of them has, the video streaming and stuff. And, one of them has park hours.
Any other questions?
Yeah, if I deploy a new host into a cluster, you have the validation process that goes on as we're accelerating a data store. Is there an automated process where if I deploy out a new host in the cluster and it ends up with a data center?
Exactly. Let's see. I can.
Quick, make a new host.
I didn't make. Yeah, I didn't build my Mac to accommodate that. In fact, as I think about it, I should have had multiple NFS data stores just to handle this case. But what it'll do is you have another data store, you click it. It's going to look at all of the hosts, and it's going to say, well, 3 of the hosts already have accelerators, 2 of them don't. It's going to do that exact same resource validation process only on the 2, and then you're off to the races.
Yeah, I was thinking that I've got a 6-node cluster, I add 2 additional nodes.
Oh, now I see what you're saying. Yeah, so it's going to say, in the top right corner, it's going to say, hey, data store is partially accelerated. What would you like to do? You could leave it partially accelerated. That's fine if that's what you want to do. Or you could just click remediate, and it's going to deploy the accelerators, plumb them in, done.
Is there the ability to set a default so that you can say, when I add new systems?
Not yet, but there has to be. And
yeah, that would be good.
Thanks for getting that, Carrie.
Because you could have yeah. Either always accelerate or never accelerate.
Exactly. Yeah,
automatically. Yeah.
We have to have reasonable defaults, but there has to be controls for adjusting this.
I'm just thinking, because if it's just that and you have to manually go through that every time you add a host, that would be a drag.
Yeah, and I think it's a confidence building process, right?
Yep.
You go through this process with the manual mode, and you're confident that it's detecting it and resolving it, then you transition to auto.
Yep.
You also said you have a development customer who's running this with a little bit of code. Can you run us through the issues that come up from that?
Sure, it's really what was highlighted previously, where you've got a second data store and you just need to make sure it's presented. Well, today, you need to make sure that it's presented from a different VM kernel interface. We're working on strategies to even eliminate that. Pixie is a wonderful thing.
When it works.
That's true. Anything else? Can give you some timeline information and then get you on to the rest of your day.
Hello, welcome to...
There you go.
I feel so welcome.
So what's next?
I'm scared.
We're doing field trials right now. It's the alphas I was referring to. We're doing a public beta, which will be available at VMworld. And then we're going to go GA. And when we say GA, we mean suitable for production use for Q4. And then right after that, SSDs. The point of SSDs, though, is we're going to help you onboard them. you don't need them. But if you want them, we can help you bring them into your
So
environment.
you're talking about flash
What sort of
as tier 2?
performance?
Yeah, exactly. That's more or less the strategy. Yeah.
What sort of a performance gain do you get if you say you're currently running on spinning disks and you introduce SSDs into your environment? Would your product either A, be necessary, or B, would it further accelerate the IO?
That's a great question. I haven't actually tried it. I'll do that in the lab though.
Yeah.
If you shoot me your information, I'll send you some results afterwards.
I don't know anything about
Yeah, so John, it depends a lot on the workload. So what these guys are doing, it's a small, very, very fast cache. So if your workload has very hot spots, then you'll get a huge amount of performance acceleration from this.
Yeah, SSDs are long tail.
If you have an application that has a larger warm area that's not as hot, the lesser acceleration of the SSD is going to cover more data, and you'll get a bigger impact. So it's going to be very much workload apparent. This is going to be really good for those applications where there's a lot of data commonality, like VDI, or a large number of small servers where the Windows part is in common and is going to be getting hammered because the deduplication lets them take the small amount of space and use it for that common data. But predicting how well caching is going to work, you have to look at the application first.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. But so SSD support, it's coming. I think you probably find Infinio to be a little bit different than a lot of the enterprise software you've used in the past, and SSDs are going to be very, very different.
When you say Q4, that's calendar Q4
Yes.
2013?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, which Q4,
Yeah.
That's our joke at work.
It'll be ready.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time and the questions and the discussion. Thank you.